Look around at the 5 people you talk to most. Now ask yourself an honest question. If you became exactly as ambitious, as disciplined, and as awake as they are, would your life get better or worse? Sit with that for a second. Most people have never actually asked it. They can tell you their monthly screen time down to the minute. They can tell you their resting heart rate, their sleep score, their macros. But ask them to explain why the 5 people they call closest ended up in that position, and the honest answer is usually the same: proximity. A shared school, a shared office, a shared postcode at exactly the right moment. Friendship, for most of us, was never chosen. It was assigned by circumstance and then defended out of habit. And here's the uncomfortable part. Those people are not neutral. Every person you let close to you is quietly voting on who you become. Think about the last time you had an ambitious idea and said it out loud to someone you trust. Did their face open up, or did something flicker across it first? A half-second of unease before the supportive words arrived? Did they ask questions that made the idea sharper, or did they gently and kindly find a way to explain why it probably wouldn't work? You may not have registered it consciously. Some part of you did. Some part of you always does. This is the terrain Friedrich Nietzsche spent much of his life quietly mapping, and it is not the Nietzsche most people expect. He's remembered as the philosopher of the lone individual, the solitary wolf forging its own path against the herd. But underneath that reputation sits a much more personal, much more demanding idea. The human beings are never shaped in isolation. We are shaped by proximity. The people nearest to us either sharpen us or slowly wear us down. And pretending otherwise is one of the great comforting lies of an easy life. Nietzsche knew this from the inside, because his own record with friendship was a wound he carried for years. His relationship with the composer Richard Wagner began as something close to worship and collapsed into bitterness, largely because Nietzsche came to feel that Wagner wanted disciples, not equals, people who would reflect his greatness back at him rather than challenge it. A later, brief connection with the thinker Lou Salome ended in heartbreak and painful silence. For much of his adult life, he lived alone in rented rooms across Switzerland and Italy, writing at a furious pace for an audience that, for most of his career, barely existed. He understood, with the precision only real deprivation can teach, exactly what it costs a person to go without genuine companionship, and exactly what it costs to settle for the false kind instead. Out of that came a philosophy of friendship with almost nothing in common with the version printed on greeting cards. Nietzsche did not believe friendship exists to make you comfortable. He believed, at its highest form, friendship exists to make you more than you currently are. He describes the ideal friend not as someone who simply supports you, but as someone who respects you enough to resist you. What he calls, strikingly, your best enemy. Not an enemy in the sense of conflict for its own sake, but someone whose regard for you runs deep enough that they refuse to simply agree with everything you say. Someone who can see exactly what you're capable of, and who won't quietly let you settle for less just to keep the peace. Now compare that to how most of us actually live. Somewhere along the way, we redefine friendship as the absence of friction. We reward the people who make us feel good in the moment and drift quietly from the ones who challenge us, even when that challenge comes from real care. We've built entire social lives around comfort, and then we wonder privately why so many of our friendships feel thin, pleasant enough, but strangely weightless. But this is where the real problem begins, and it goes deeper than simple bad luck in who you happen to befriend. Human beings are relentlessly social animals. We absorb the standards of whoever surrounds us almost without noticing it happening. What counts as a normal amount of ambition, a normal amount of effort, a normal way to spend a free evening, even a normal level of honesty, all of it is being quietly calibrated by the 5 or 6 people you spend the most time with. You're not choosing your own standards nearly as freely as you assume. Much of the time, you are borrowing them. This is close to what Nietzsche meant by herd morality, not just a comment on society at large, but a warning about the small herds each of us builds without noticing. The friend group, the social circle, the closed loop where everyone quietly validates everyone else's choices, and where anyone who tries to grow past the group's shared ceiling gets, without quite realizing it, pulled back down. It rarely looks like punishment. It looks like a joke about how you've changed. It looks like mild teasing when you skip a round of drinks to get up early and work. It looks like a friend going just slightly quiet when your life starts moving faster than theirs. Why does this happen? Rarely out of cruelty. Most people who dim someone else's ambition aren't villains. They're protecting themselves. If you grow and they don't, your growth becomes a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable when a person isn't ready to look into one. So instead of confronting their own stagnation directly, it's easier, quieter, and far more socially acceptable to gently discourage yours. Nietzsche saw this pattern with unusual clarity. Mediocrity rarely attacks ambition head-on. More often, it smiles at ambition, jokes about it, and simply waits for it to run out of energy. And this is the part most people never fully confront, because it demands an uncomfortable kind of honesty. If your own ambitions have quietly shrunk over the years, if you've grown strangely at peace with a version of your life that would have disappointed you a decade ago, the real question isn't only what's wrong with you. The real question is who you've been standing beside while it happened. Here is where Nietzsche's idea stops being an abstract theory and becomes something close to personal. Choosing your friends wisely doesn't mean becoming cold, superior, or endlessly suspicious of people. That would simply be another form of self-protection wearing the mask of discernment. What it actually requires is harder, total honesty about the real effects specific people have on you, instead of relying on habit, history, or guilt to keep you tied to them. Ask yourself plainly, after time with this person, do you leave feeling more capable or more resigned? When you talk about your goals, are they genuinely curious, or do they gently steer the conversation back towards safer, smaller ground? When something in your life goes well, is their first reaction warmth, or is there a flicker of something else quickly covered over? None of this is about hunting for villains. It's about finally seeing clearly what you've spent years refusing to look at directly. Nietzsche also insisted, and this matters just as much, that you have to become someone worth that kind of friendship before you can expect to receive it. He had no patience for people who wanted extraordinary companions while offering nothing extraordinary in return. If you want friends capable of challenging you, you first have to become capable of being challenged without collapsing into defensiveness. If you want depth from your friendships, you have to be willing to bring depth yourself instead of performing a safe, curated version of who you are. Friendship, for Nietzsche, was never a transaction of convenience. It was a meeting of two people, each strong enough to walk their own path alone, who choose freely to walk part of it together. This reframes loneliness itself. There's a very modern kind of isolation that has nothing to do with how many people surround you and everything to do with how few of them actually see you. You can be in every group chat, invited to every gathering, technically never alone, and still feel a specific hollow ache, the ache of being known widely and understood by almost no one. Nietzsche would say that's not a failure of your social calendar. It's a failure of selection. Quantity of company was never the point. Depth of it always was. So what does choosing wisely actually look like once the sentimentality is stripped away? It starts with an audit most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Sitting down, honestly, and asking which relationships are expanding you and which are quietly asking you to stay small. Not every friendship needs a dramatic ending. Some simply need less of your time, less of your emotional weight. Others need the opposite. More honesty, more depth, the real conversations you've been circling for years out of fear. It means learning to tell the difference between someone who challenges you and someone who merely criticizes you, because those two are not the same, And confusing them keeps people trapped for years in relationships that masquerade as growth while quietly functioning as erosion. A true challenger wants your success. A critic, often without even realizing it themselves, is more comfortable with your failure. It means being willing to outgrow people without hatred and without guilt, understanding that this is not betrayal. It's simply what happens when two lives head in genuinely different directions, and pretending otherwise serves no one. And it means becoming, on purpose, the kind of friend worth having. Someone who offers real honesty instead of easy agreement, whose support carries weight precisely because it was never unconditional flattery in the first place. Because here's the truth Nietzsche leaves you with, and it is heavier than it first sounds. You become an average of the company you keep, whether you consciously chose that company or simply inherited it by accident. There is no neutral option. There is no version of your life where the people around you leave no mark on who you're becoming. The only real choice available to you is whether that shaping happens on purpose or happens to you while your attention is somewhere else entirely. So look again at the 5 people closest to you, not with resentment, not with sudden coldness, but with the same clear, unsentimental honesty Nietzsche demanded of anyone serious about their own life. Are they sharpening you, or are they slowly, quietly teaching you to want less? Because in the end, you will not simply choose your friends. You will become them. And the only question that ever really mattered is whether you're willing to choose that becoming on purpose, or let it happen to you the way it happens to almost everyone else, by accident, by comfort, by never once stopping to ask.